Let's jump back into Chapter 2 of the Scarlands series. Last we left off, the colonists had established a foothold in the ancient ruined city. They've been constantly harassed by the local wildlife, and so far, they've been barely able to scratch out a living in the limited arable soil that's left in this place. They did manage to make a friend in the form of one of the boghounds living in the area. The rest of the colonists don't feel quite as fond of the thing, given their fear, but Voss knows the boghound won't hurt any of them. The colonists have also been hard at work trying to recruit one of the pirates that they had captured when they went out on a raid of their own. Well, not so much a raid as much as it was stopping an EMI dynamo from crippling the region, but here we are. Unfortunately, the mood has been awful low recently in the colony. It's completely understandable, given how difficult life has been here since they arrived. It would be pretty helpful to get each of the colonists their own bedroom soon. In addition to that, we can boost the impressiveness of the dining room quite a bit. That should make everyone quite happy. Speaking of which, one of the projects that the colonists have been working on recently is the expansion of the dining room to allow a bit more space in the freezer, but also to eventually make room for a comms console to be installed. Voss still hasn't given a name to his new boghound friend. During the middle of the night, right at the end of summer, Voss had a dream about the spirit of a boghound visiting him. He woke up and the name suddenly came to him. From then on, he called the hound Boggart. He didn't know where the word came from, but he'd heard it once before and it seemed to suit the creature. After that, Voss was having trouble going back to sleep. While he was still awake from the dream he'd been having, he received a message from a representative of the Empire. They're requesting permission to test a shipboard weapon in the area. Weapon testing is likely what put the inhabitants of the city in such danger in the first place, but our colonists lack the necessary hindsight to know better. The reward that's being offered is a bit too tempting to pass up. Well, the fallout of the weapon testing is going to cause a lingering fog for 7 days, but at least that's not too bad. Now that the colonists have begun to get a little more settled in, they're going to need to start focusing on the long-term necessities of living here. One of which is going to be new clothing being made to replace the tattered pieces. Clothing gets worn down so quickly in such a hostile environment, and they'll need good quality pieces to replace what's lost. Eventually, they're going to need to start producing quality textiles, but for now, they can just use the leather from the local boghounds and any other animals that venture too close to the outpost. Jet's been a prisoner for a few days now. They haven't made much progress in convincing her to join, but they've been working on it the best that they can. Initially, she was completely intent on bringing the colony to a quick and decisive end, so it won't be easy changing her mind to the degree required to recruit her. But Man has become dead set on it. She thinks Jet will be a strong addition to the colony and provide insight that can only come from someone who's lived here as long as Jet has. Meanwhile, Herman has absolutely lost it. Life in the wasteland is just a bit too much for her to handle right now. Man and Wilson approached, hoping to come to a peaceful resolution, only to hear the horrific slurs that Herman was spewing about xenohumans. It was enough for Man and Wilson to quickly change tactics to something a bit more violent. She stopped quite quickly after that. Makes you wonder exactly what was said that caused them to get so violent. Must have been pretty awful and does not bear repeating. They need to finish rebuilding the cooler so the freezer can be expanded. The old one is in a bit of a bad position and it's just not going to work any longer. Alright, there we go. That's going to work much better. Now let's tear out the old one and add a few shelves in here. Eventually, the entire base is going to need new floors. By the time this place is finished, everything's going to be much more luxurious than when they started. For now, the new floors can be concrete just to get rid of this old ancient asphalt that runs throughout the city. We'll have to decide what floors to put in over the long term. Something a bit nicer than concrete. Oh, just wonderful. Now Wilson has had enough. At least it wasn't an insulting spree this time. Unfortunately, instead of that, he's going to take his frustrations out on inanimate objects. Well, at least anything he destroys can be rebuilt. And there goes the table, almost immediately. Not off to a great start here. The plan has been to move these beds out of the starting room and into bedrooms, but until the bedrooms are fully built, they can temporarily use the dining hall as a barracks. That way the mood should improve a bit, and the laboratory will function a bit better. Let's hope Wilson doesn't destroy any beds while he's at it. Okay, the beds are moved in and Wilson's finally got over his little fit. Hopefully things start to improve a little bit from here. Now it's time to rearrange the laboratory so a new high-tech research bench can be fit in here. While they're at it, they can move the battery over from the dining hall and save a bit of room here. Unfortunately, while all these workbenches are still in here, it's not going to count as a laboratory, but that'll be a goal for the long term. We can move out the workbenches once a workshop finally gets built. It looks like Jet is not going to give up without a fight. It's admirable that she's struggling so desperately to be free again. From a certain perspective, you have to admire her tenacity. From another perspective, the colonists are offering her a just life of cooperation and peace. Aside from the occasional life-threatening and extremely violent colonial defense, of course. Unfortunately for Jet, Voss has been recently training Bogart for a moment exactly like this one. Well, hopefully not exactly like this one, but pretty close. Using an attack dog on an unarmed escaping prisoner does seem a bit fascist, but these colonists are definitely not fascists. Definitely not. Definitely not. Bogart absolutely shredded Jet. She did manage to get a few good strikes in, but caused nothing more than a few bruises to the Boghound. Wilson can jump in now and tend to the wounds. Time to get her all healed up and get back to the process of recruiting her. Hopefully this isn't a setback to convincing her to join. I'm sure she will forgive and forget. They've been hard at work researching new technologies for the colony to make use of. The next one they finished is plate armor, which leads right into figuring out how to make flak armor. It's going to be important to get everybody a set of flak armor, at least the chest piece and the helmet. To the surprise of absolutely no one, Jet has contracted an infection in one of her many Boghound-inflicted wounds. It looks like it was one of the scratches across her left shoulder. Wilson's already there tending to it. She should be fine with a little bit of dirt rubbed in it. If it gets bad enough, she can have some medicine later on. We'll just have to keep an eye on things. Eventually, we're going to need to move all of the crafting up into that new room on the north side. But for now, let's place the machining table and the smelter in this area that we cleared out. Hopefully the machining table and Flakfest tech will be available at roughly the same time. The three colonists that do most of the fighting already have armor, but Jet and any future recruits are going to need to get flak armor. Not to mention any replacements that our starting colonists are going to need when the durability drops. On top of that, it really wouldn't hurt to get higher quality for everyone. Well, it's nice to see Voss conversing with someone who isn't a Boghound. It makes sense that it would be Man that he's talking to. Voss might not get along with the other colonists, but Man has been the one who's been the warmest to everyone around her, including Voss. She really seems to put in the effort to make him feel like he's at least one of the team and not just an outsider. Whether or not he actually feels like one of the team is an entirely different matter. Now that the smelter's up and running, they can finally go around the map and start bringing back the slag that's strewn about the wasteland. That should bring in steel a bit quicker than trying to mine it. Mining has been rather slow, given that none of them have any skill in it whatsoever. The electricity generation was already lacking, and now with the addition of the smelter, and hopefully soon a machining table, the colonists are going to need to expand power production as soon as they possibly can. They do have quite a bit of chem fuel sitting around from the shuttle, so they may as well go with a chem fuel generator for now. And it looks like flak armor is finally finished. Now Herman can get to work on those armor upgrades. Well, now I just need to get that machining table finished. She's been having trouble getting along with the other colonists, so she's been feeling down lately. But the thought of working with a machining table again has brought a bit of joy to her. And her spirit's been up ever since the idea was presented. In fact, even the process of smelting the slag to transform into the table has been an exciting experience for her. Hopefully no more insulting sprees in her near future. Another manhunting pack has arrived to cause problems. They finally agreed upon and officially designated the barracks as an area to be used as a safety retreat point during these times. They've used the room to retreat away from manhunting animals before, but now it's official, especially since it's the only room with access to the food supply. It's got their beds in it as well now, so it should work well for short-term safe shelter. Now, all they have to deal with is the sound of the raccoon screeching. That and the sounds of them dying to the traps. Pretty gruesome. And now they have no traps. Another problem to deal with. That can at least wait until the rest of the raccoons clear out. While the colonists waited out in the barracks, they've got nothing else to do but chat with one another. Looks like English has also been having trouble making friends with the other colonists. She seems to really only get along with Herman, and even then, that relationship is not the strongest. Recently, they chatted about using razors. For shaving hair, right? Not for violence, right? Right? It turns out she likes Wilson and Amanda decently enough, but unfortunately, those feelings are not reciprocated. Wilson has recently become friends with Herman. That's wonderful to see. They've even been chatting with each other about birch trees. It's interesting to see that even though broken up, Wilson and Man seem to still like one another quite a bit. Although Man quite a bit more than Wilson. Maybe the short relationship was exactly what they needed to realize that they'd be better off as friends. That or their professional relationship got in the way, and the power dynamic made things awkward. Probably that one. A few of the raccoons are still prowling around outside. Unfortunately, Jet has taken the worst opportunity possible to try to make another break for it. This time with a bit more violence than finesse. She's already broken through one door and she'll easily make it through the second. Then the raccoons can deal with her. Hopefully she doesn't die. Man has some pretty big plans for Jet, and that would put a quick end to them. Wow, she got absolutely shredded by the raccoons. She took bites and scratches all over her body. Man risked her life by charging out through the door and dragged Jet right back through into the barracks. Now Wilson can jump to work, tending as many of the wounds as possible. Hopefully he can fix this before she bleeds out. Okay, the wounds are all dealt with. Now for the nerve-wracking period of whether or not Scaria will set in. Let's get her into a bed and get her fed so she can have her best chance at recovery. Looks like they've decided to celebrate being able to go outside again by going in the freezer and having a party. Weird place for a party, but they must not want to be around Jet right now. Turns out a person absolutely covered in raccoon bites is a bit of a downer. While Jet was recovering, Scaria did in fact set in. Her torso has turned an unusual red color and the wounds have begun to smell just awful. It's rather unfortunate that the colonists have to try to sleep in the barracks with a smell so nearby. Now it's time to get back to work on repairing all that damage that was incurred during the Manhunter pack. Mostly traps, but there's also a few doors that are going to need to be replaced. Thanks for that, Jet. A small group of visitors have arrived from the west, only to be met immediately by a group of hungry boghounds. They seem to comfort everyone eventually in this place. One of the boghounds survived the encounter, and it's a female. Voss felt pity for what happened and decided to rescue the creature. It seems a bit misplaced given the boghounds were the aggressors, but Voss is a strange man. He came out to check on it and see how bad the wounds were. After realizing how close to death the thing was, he pleaded with Wilson to help. His pleas were successful, and Wilson came right out to get to work tending the wounds. His job didn't end there. They discovered one of the visitors had collapsed in the ruins not far from the outpost. Herman dragged the person back to the hospital, and once again, Wilson set to work tending the wounds. Alright, that should be enough to get them back on their feet and headed home. Oh, and now a bulk goods trader has arrived from a nearby tribe. Given that wood has been such a problem for our colonists, they've decided to barter everything they possibly can to acquire the trader's entire supply of wood. They had to offer a large portion of their food supply and a fair bit of clothing and textile, but in the end, they convinced the trader to part with their wood. Pricey, but hopefully worth it in the end. Well, this is a bizarre twist of events. It turns out Voss has a lover, and she's traveling not far from the outpost. Only now are we discovering that Voss had been living on this planet prior to his current contract. Not only that, but he had apparently developed a serious relationship with a villager in a nearby town. This is something that he's kept secret up until now. It turns out his lover knew he was here, but was told to stay away until it was safe. She became a little impatient and came to check in on Voss. Not wanting to disappoint, she kept her distance. She just wanted to see that he was okay. After that, she continued on her way back to her village. Voss continued his work, never knowing she had come so close. Maybe one day soon, they'll be reunited permanently. At least now, we know Voss isn't completely incapable of feeling emotion. It's just awfully difficult for him and takes the right person. The boghound that Voss and Wilson had rescued is in rough shape. It still has wounds all over its body, and infection has spread throughout its head. Unfortunately, they can't bring it inside, so it's going to have to just rest up out here, and hopefully in the end, the colonists will be able to use that as a starting point to tame the creature. In fact, later that same night, the boghound was back on its feet and walking around slowly. Voss took this as an opportunity to see if he could go feed the hound by hand. Man did not like the idea at all, but unable to talk him out of his plan, she decided to accompany him just in case things went sideways and someone needed to intervene. She had her revolver at the ready as Voss reached out his hand offering rice to the wild beast. In its weakened state, it must have stopped seeing Voss as a threat and it happily ate up the rice. From that point on, Voss was certain that his new boghound friend would not hurt him. Man was satisfied that he wasn't in any danger and decided to go back to have a meal and get on with the rest of her day. From then on, Voss would start calling the new boghound Bog Thing. Man has still been hard at work trying to convince Jet that life here is better than she could possibly hope for back with her band of pirates. So far, it seemed to Man that Jet was starting to come around to the idea, albeit rather slowly. That was okay with Man, she had all the time in the world. Jet, on the other hand, did not, and she had other ideas. Only a couple of hours after Man visited, Jet began her plan to escape. Again. This time she at least made it outside before the gunfire rang out. A couple of shots later and Jet was lying on the ground in a pool of blood. Wilson brought her back to bed and began tending her wounds again. All the way grumbling to himself while he worked. He was tired of having to tend her wounds over and over again. But that had become his life now. It looks like Voss and English are already getting into it again in the workshop. Voss seems like a bully whenever he interacts with English. He clearly has the physical advantage over her, and yet he does not hold back. She always ends up on the ground, beaten bloody whenever the two get into conflict. Poor English had to crawl all the way back into the barracks before Voss finally took pity on her and helped her the rest of the way to the bed. Voss might not be a great person, but at least there's a shred of humanity left in there. Maybe. Hopefully. The colonists need to start working on getting psychite tea made. Not only will it help with the general mood and can be used whenever one of them is feeling down, but it's also going to be critical to keeping Jet alive. They've already managed to grow some of the plant. Now they just need to brew it into tea. Maybe in the end it'll help cut down on the insulting sprees and tantrums. One can only hope. Everyone was busy working around the colony, only to be interrupted when suddenly a crash was heard just outside the colony to the east. Man and Wilson were out of the colony to the north, and they took the opportunity to scout out what had happened. It was only then that they realized a cluster of mechs had crashed down into the area from orbit. They were still dormant and none of them were moving, but they knew it was only a matter of time until they woke up again and began roaming the area. They went back and alerted the rest of the colonists of what had happened, and together they came to the agreement that for now they would steer well clear of the area to avoid waking up the mechs prematurely. Through her many attempts at escape, Jet has accumulated a massive amount of damage to her body. Most of it has healed over time, but her left kidney is no longer functioning. It's difficult to say when exactly it was damaged beyond repair, but it's clear now that she's going to need a replacement. Until then, her immune response is going to be weakened severely. It's possible that any future infection could end up being her death. The colonists are going to have to go out of their way to try to find a replacement if they want her sticking around for long. Well, they finally finished biofuel refining. At least when chem fuel from the shuttle runs out, they'll be able to produce more. Unfortunately, there's not really a lot of resources for producing chem fuel, but they'll have to make do with what they've got. At least the option is there if the situation arises. Let's check back in on Voss. He still doesn't seem to be forming any friendships with anyone in the colony. At least him and Man have come to an understanding and they don't hate each other. That's at least going to make it easier for them to work with one another going forward. He's got a terrible rivalry brewing with English, but that has been pretty obvious from their interactions with each other. Interestingly enough, even after all the abuse, English doesn't dislike Voss. That seems really dysfunctional. They even recently spoke with one another about jaguars. Yeah, maybe in the end they'll find common ground and learn to get along. That's not terribly likely. Now let's take a look at what Man has been chatting about with everyone. She expressed interest in Jet's mining skills and then encouraged her to think about changing teams. Well, they do desperately need someone with mining skills, so that does check out. It's unclear whether or not that's actually going to convince her to join, but we shall see. Looks like English told a joke about eating habits to Man. Was Man the subject of the joke? Yeah, it looks like Man doesn't particularly like English, so it makes you wonder. Next up, checking in on English. She actually seems to like everyone in the colony reasonably well. That's even after the abuse that she's taken from other people. With her work in biospheres, she was forced to be in a corporate environment prior to coming here, so it's likely that she's used to this kind of abuse. Maybe even thrives on it at this point. Yep, that's definitely dysfunctional. Wilson and Man joked about birthdays, while deep down, Wilson is still feeling awfully resentful that the two broke up. He does treat her nicely, but secretly, he doesn't care much for Man these days. It's interesting that Herman is extremely fond of Voss, but Voss returns absolutely none of that. If Herman disappeared tomorrow, he would not care. If Voss disappeared, Herman would be crushed. They recently chatted about the weather and cryptosleep tombs. Not exactly the most exciting conversation. It's likely Herman went on and on at length about both subjects while Voss just quietly listened, and just to be polite, while returning very little in the way of response. At the end of their little party, English openly insulted Voss's animal taming ability. Considering how important that is to Voss, it's shocking that it didn't end in another violent fight. Of all the things he could hear, you'd think that would be the most irritating. Maybe it's one of those things that he's confident enough about that he's comfortable enough to brush off. There's still a large amount of unexplored ruins in the area around the outpost. Each time Man led a team out, it would eventually run into some snag that would cause them to retreat back to the outpost. Intent on heading out again, Man assembled the other two with combat experience and they all ventured out again. The three gathered just outside the ruins. They collected themselves and they opened the door to journey inward. Immediately they were met with a nest of angry insects with the intent on defending their nest with their lives. The hounds leapt through the door and began tearing at the bugs. The other three fired their gun through the doorway. bugs were dead, but one of the hounds took a fair bit of damage. It's better to return to the outpost for the day, let them recover from the fight. The ruins exploration will just have to continue another day. Man stayed behind to make sure the bugs were dead and the nest was cleared out. No one wants to have to deal with more bugs later on. Later that same day, a bulk goods trader arrived to sell their wares. Hopefully they brought more wood to trade. It's perfect timing as the colonists just came upon a pile of insect jelly that the trade caravan would surely love to get their hands on. Wood and cloth for insect products? That seems like a fair trade. And yet another party in the barracks. Who's in charge of putting together these parties and who approved the budget? Must be Man trying to keep up morale. There's so much to bring down the colonists that they have to take every opportunity that they can to brighten the spirits. Parties really are fantastic for that. Well, just when you thought Voss was improving as a human being, it turns out he's just getting worse. While his lover is out there worrying about him every day, Voss is here trying to start a relationship with Man. He boasted about his own personal hygiene, and Man was having none of it. What does that mean for an Edeking? That he has well-combed hair and no lice? Well, it is true. That is important in a place like this. Not sure it's an effective way to woo someone, but here we are. After the hounds were healed up, Man was intent on returning to the ruins to fully explore the surrounding area. She wanted to remove all of the unknowns of the local region so she could better prepare for defending the colony. They cleared room to room until coming upon an unfamiliar sight, a device no one recognized. All three agreed to go back quietly out the door and lock it behind them. Better to leave these sort of things untouched. They continued exploring for some time before deciding to turn back for the night, before it got too dark to continue. The next afternoon, the colonists gathered in the barracks, each planning to say a few words in hopes of convincing Jet to stay with them for the foreseeable future. Man was the first to speak. She spoke of uniting for the greater good, their shared history, and about belonging to a cause greater than themselves. She ended with a few words on right and wrong. Unfortunately, before anyone else could speak, Jet became absolutely fed up with what felt to her to be empty words. The attempt completely backfired. She became convinced more than ever that if she just held out a little longer, she could find a way to get out of here. Growing frustrated, the colonists returned her to her cell and planned their next step. Man did come by later to try to smooth over what must have been some pretty ruffled feathers. From Man's perspective, it did seem to help calm things down, but as soon as Man left, Jet grew even more frustrated. Again, she snapped. She began smashing the door with her bare fists, hoping to break it down and find her way to freedom. The colonists heard the noise and ran for the hospital. They sent the hounds in, and they made short work of the escaping prisoner. Unfortunately, she took severe wounds all over her body in the process. If someone didn't see to these wounds immediately, she was sure to die. Wilson once again jumped to action to try to save the prisoner's life. By now, he had begun to question whether or not all this effort was worth the trouble to convince one individual. He began to wonder whether they should just let her go free. Unfortunately, Man was in charge and she had other plans. Since arriving, the colonists had to frequently fend off boghound attacks. By now, they'd become routine. The boghounds would grow hungry and try their luck eating a colonist, but it would always end in the three-armed colonists making their way outside and putting down the threat. They began to worry a lot less about the threat of the hounds, and then they began to focus more on the threats that might arrive from outside the ruins. It had taken quite a while, but Jet was finally coming around to Man's way of thinking. Jet hadn't completely converted, but Man could tell she was really starting to come around to the colony's ideology. She was convinced it wouldn't be long now until they finally brought her on board. Later that night, around midnight, all the colonists except Voss had gone to bed. Voss was busy working on the last few projects that he'd hoped to finish that day. He looked up from his work to see that a stunning color had taken across the sky. It was a beautiful aurora that would stop most people in their tracks. Unfortunately, Voss was one of the few people who couldn't appreciate such things. He saw the aurora and went immediately back to work. A shame, really. None of the other colonists would have any idea such a beautiful event was occurring right over their heads. Voss certainly would never mention it. During the evening, on the 7th of December, all of Man's hard work finally paid off. Jet admitted she had become convinced of the things Man had been saying all along. It's unclear what exactly was the final point that Man made to convince her, but it finally worked. Now all that remained was to pose the possibility of her joining one final time. Overnight, a severe storm descended upon the area and forced all the colonists awake in a fright. With little choice, they began their day as they normally would, if a bit earlier. Man went to visit Jet as she usually did, but this time something had changed. Man presented the opportunity that she presented every morning, an offer to join, and this time, Jet accepted. Man was shocked to say the least, but the two left the room, this time, as friends. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up, make sure you subscribe to the channel for updates on all future videos. For those of you who made it all the way to the end, please consider checking out my Patreon to help support the creation of more videos like this one. You'll find the link in the description below. Thanks for watching, and see you for the next one.